Alright, so hey yo, shout out Kiki, shout out Nico, shout out Hoben, shout out Sienna, Ogre, shout out Trevor, shout out Kaimana, can't forget about that. Shout out Kaimana brother, Trevor brother, shout out Noah, So I got something cool for you guys. Let's react, and I'm gonna mute my mic and then unmute it whenever I want to. Okay, let's go. Among Us movie.
The dog is much too swift, easily evading the aerial attack. The helicopter and dog begin to close in on an American research
this kid's
facility.
actually dog
The men of the facility head outside. Their curiosities are raised by the circling helicopter. They notice it's from a Norwegian research base. The Norwegians continue their attack, chucking a grenade at the dog. The helicopter comes down, and the husky runs towards the Americans for safety. One of the Norwegians pulls back the pin of a grenade, but clumsily drops it behind him.
Kid, your dog water, you're gonna die now.
The other one desperately tries to find it in the snow, but gets himself and the helicopter blown up in the process. The remaining Norwegian shouts and readies his rifle before firing at the dog. Though, he grazes one of the men, Bennings, instead. The dog runs off, and he makes chase, but is stopped in his tracks by the sharpshooting camp leader, Gary. The husky runs up to Clark, the dog handler, and he comforts it. Dr. Copper patches up Bennings, and Blair, the biologist, checks up on the radio operator, Windows, who has been unsuccessful in making contact with anyone. The men are able to find some papers concerning the Norwegian operation. There were 8 other men who potentially need saving.
Cool.
McCready, the team's pilot, and Dr. Copper prepare to fly off to investigate the Norwegian base. As they're departing, the husky watches intently from under a table. It later navigates around the base before entering a room with an unknown man. Upon arrival, McCready and Copper find a base that's been through hell. They find a bloodied fire axe embedded in one of the doors. They enter and explore the room before Copper notices a trail of blood. He follows its path and finds the frozen remains of a man who took his own life. His wrists and throat have been slashed wide open. Further exploration leads the pair to research documents and videos of the long-gone Norwegian crew. McCready checks out another room and makes a peculiar discovery when he finds a giant block of ice. They move on and inspect outside, finding a burnt and mangled corpse, barely recognizable as either man or beast. The pair return to home base, and once again, the dog watches intently. They brought with them the body they found. The crew circles around, repulsed and yet in awe of the grotesque creature that lies before them. Blair begins an autopsy on the creature, and
I don't know if I can show that. There we go.
Begins to transform, first spreading apart its face. Tentacles lash out, but Clark slams the door and holds it shut. McCready now too hears the creature's ungodly groans and the screams of first spreading
Ew!
and then growing crab-like legs. The panicked huskies bark and try to break free, but are ultimately subdued by the creature. Hearing the commotion, Clark heads back to inspect. He opens the door, and 2 fear-stricken huskies run off. Tentacles lash out, but Clark slams the door and holds it shut. McCready now too hears the creature's ungodly groans and the screams of suffering dogs. He sounds the alarm, and him and a few others arrive. He brings with him a shotgun, but quickly realizes they're going to need more firepower. He tells Bennings to go grab Chance, and then proceeds towards the kennel's entrance. McCready points the flashlight at the creature, revealing its ungodly. Clark furiously snatches away the shotgun. They can only watch in horror now. After a few moments, the crew puts out the fire, and Blair performs an autopsy on the creature. He slips its
Not again!
Finally, how much alone time did he spend with it? Tensions quickly rise as Blair glares at Clark with suspicious eyes. We cut to the team reviewing the footage left by the Norwegians. We see them standing on something frozen under the ice before blowing it up. The team figures out the location of the site, and McCready flies off with Palmer and Norris. Shortly after arriving, they come across a giant alien spaceship nested within a crater of ice. They rappel down, and McCready asks Norris how long he thinks the ship has been entombed here. He estimates 100,000 years. They climb back up and find a large rectangle of ice missing, just about the size of the ice block McCready found in the other base. They return home and share their findings, to which Childs is incredulous.
Just cannot believe any of this voodoo bullshit.
Hey, you can't say that here!
Reprimanding whomever left their dirty clothes in the kitchen trash. McCready inspects it briefly, noticing that it's torn up. With concerned eyes, Blair looks upon a picture of the Norwegian crew. They're huddled around the block of ice, containing the nightmare that sealed their fates. He goes on to run an analysis of the creature, simulating how it assimilates cells on the computer. He determines that there's a 75% chance that one of the crew members is already infected. If it breaks out and reaches civilization, humanity would be fully consumed within 37 months. He advises the crew through the loudspeaker system to move their stuff out of the storage room to make space for the bodies. Bennings and Windows carry a corpse in as McCready takes his things out. He's intercepted at the door by Fuchs, the assistant biologist. He whispers to McCready that he needs to talk to him in private. They head out, and Windows wraps up in the storage room, leaving Bennings behind as a piece of one of the bodies. From within the tractor, Fuchs shares his concerns about Blair with McCready. He locked himself in his room and won't answer the door. Though, Fuchs managed to get a hold of his notes and learns that the cells of the burned creatures are still alive and active. Back in the storage room, Windows returns to check up on Bennings, but finds bloody and torn up clothes instead.
Wait. Can I?
Turns, spotting Bennings. Fuchs. They all return to the storage room, but the body and clothes have vanished. Though, the window's been broken. Just outside, Bennings' imitation is running through the snow. The alarm is triggered, and the crew surrounds the creature. It dons the face of the man they once knew, but its mutated hands betray its true nature. McCready douses it in gasoline and sets it ablaze with his flare. The crew collects the rest of the bodies and thoroughly soaks them in gasoline before starting a scorching fire. They can't afford to leave any trace left behind. As they watch the bodies burn, they realize Blair is missing. The others search for him inside while McCready finishes up outside. Out of the corner of his eye, he spots Blair running out of the helicopter with an axe in hand. He's torn the thing apart. Suddenly, a gunshot goes off. McCready runs back into the station to find a seemingly crazy Blair chopping up the radio room.
Nobody gets in and out of here! Nobody!
Frankly, I'm on his side. He tells Childs to check on things. Upon returning, he reports that the tractor is busted and the rest of the dogs are dead. Childs manages to safely draw out the rest of Blair's bullets, and McCready charges him with a table. They subdue him and take him to a shack, which they board up from the outside. McCready chats with him, and Blair warns him to watch Clark very closely. Outside, paranoia circulates around the team about who is and isn't human. Dr. Copper suggests that they test who's infected by taking blood samples and mixing it with the blood they have in storage, which they know isn't contaminated. They go to retrieve the blood, but find it's been drained. The creature must have anticipated this test. The only people with access were Gary and Dr. Copper, but someone else could have gotten their hands on the key. Overcome with despair, Windows runs off and grabs a shotgun, but is ultimately calmed down by Gary. Due to suspicion, Gary offers to step down as leader, and the even-tempered McCready takes over. A snowstorm looms ahead as Clark, Dr. Copper, and Gary are sedated. McCready checks up on the skittish Fuchs, who's researching ways to test and deal with the alien. Later on, the power goes out in his room, and he leaves to investigate.
Who's that?
Yeah, who
He
is
chases
that?
after the shadowy figure and finds a torn-up piece of McCready's clothes outside. We cut to
shadowy
McCready,
figure.
asking if anyone's seen Fuchs. He heads outside of Knowles and first checks to see if Blair saw anything. They speak through a small opening in the door, and while Blair is calm, there's a noose in the background. Despite McCready inquiring about Fuchs, Blair only replies with pleas to return to the base. He promises he's okay now. For some reason, I doubt that. McCready pushes, and Blair shares that he's been hearing strange things at night. The pair explore outside and find a burnt body. They inspect further and find Fuchs's glasses. McCready notices that the lights are on in his shack, and the pair head off. Meanwhile, and after 45 minutes, the crew members decide to lock the doors. Norris, who seems unwell, sees Knowles approaching from the window. He enters alone, stating that he cut McCready loose from the guideline. During the visit to the shack, he saw McCready's torn-up clothes in the furnace. The doorknob begins to turn, but Childs is firm in his stance to not let him back in. McCready manages to enter through the supply room, for which he has the key. Childs busts the door down with the axe and prepares to unleash the flamethrower on McCready. However, he came prepared, holding a bundle of dynamite. He threatens to blow them all up if they so much as touch him, but that doesn't stop them from trying. During the scuffle, Norris collapses, and Knowles reports that he isn't breathing. Dr. Copper is brought in, and McCready, now manning the flamethrower, has taken control of the situation. Dr. Copper attempts to resuscitate Norris with a defibrillator. His gut opens up, transforming into a razor-toothed mouth. It clamps down on Dr. Copper's arms, severing them in the process. The creature McCready sets it on fire, but the adaptive alien detaches its head and sprouts legs. The crew just barely notices it. As it walks past them, McCready, too, sets it ablaze. Later, the power struggle comes to a head as McCready looks to have everyone tied up. Childs objects, but McCready is prepared to take any action necessary.
Then kill me.
Suddenly, Clark charges McCready with a knife, but is gunned down. Clark and Dr. Copper's bodies are gathered and restrained before McCready speaks to the remaining crew, and the film opens with the helicopter.
No!
Over the
Wait!
Antarctic.
I accidentally
A man with
rewinded.
binoculars
Hold up.
spots a husky, then pulls out a shadowy figure and finds a torn glasses. The act breathing. McCready sets out to be human. McCready and subjected to a knife. Later, down. Clark and Dr. Copper's bodies are
still
gathered
got
and
200
restrained
pump, bro.
before McCready speaks to the remaining crew. Having witnessed the independence of the alien's individual body parts, he theorizes that perhaps even the alien's blood could act to defend itself. He devises a test where a blood sample is taken and subjected to a hot wire. If it reacts, then they know. Windows is the first to be tested and turns out to be human. McCready arms him with another flamethrower. As the testing continues, McCready openly accuses Gary of being an imitation, but instead finds that Palmer is the one. The others can do nothing more than panic as the alien tied next to them begins a violent transformation. McCready attempts to take action, but his flamethrower is malfunctioning. The Palmer clone flies into the air before landing near windows and capitalizes on his moment of hesitation. McCready manages to get his flamethrower working and sets the alien on fire. It crashes through the wall and is finished off by a stick of dynamite. The trio of survivors beg him to return and set what remains of windows on fire. He obliges. McCready and the 3 remaining survivors, Childs, Gary, and Knowles, are revealed to be human. While ordering Childs to stay behind to watch the camp, the others go to check on Blair to give him the blood test. However, the shed is empty. Blair had escaped through the floor and was secretly building a small spacecraft in the tunnels using helicopter parts. They head back up and spot Childs running off into the storm before the power suddenly goes out. The clock is ticking now, as it won't be long before they freeze to death.
Whether we make it or not, we can't let the thing freeze again.
McCready, Knowles, and Gary begin setting fire to the complex with Molotov cocktails. They venture down to the generator room of the camp to set TNT charges, but Gary is blindsided by the infected Blair. He covers his mouth and fuses with Gary's skin. Knowles hears something and investigates alone. Of course he does. With no one responding to his calls, McCready prepares for the worst. Suddenly, the creature charges him from beneath the floorboards. It destroys the detonator and flares its monstrous form, featuring parts of the crew and the dogs. In a last-ditch effort, McCready throws a stick of dynamite at it. Both the thing and the rest of the compound explode, but McCready survives. He stumbles to his ruined shack before Childs appears behind him with his flamethrower armed. He claims he saw Blair and got lost in the storm chasing after him. Neither of them know whether the other is a thing, but it's not like they have the strength to do anything about it. With a frozen tomb awaiting them, Childs asks,
How will we make it?
Maybe we should.
On that dark note, along with a wiry laugh from McCready, the thing comes to a close. 1,000 subscribers, baby. Tell my mama I made it.